So welcome everybody to the first part of our GENEDGE COVID-19 Management Webinar Series. My name is Dean Young. I'm the Vice President of Industrial Development for GENEDGE, and I work with our field organizations and our marketing group. And I'm going to kind of MC today a little bit. I'm going to introduce you to one of our practice managers in a minute, April Schmidt, who's going to help really with the content because she's really our expert on what we're about to cover. And then, of course, we've got some real expert resources for you as well in a minute. For those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, GENEDGE is Virginia's best public resource to help manufacturing, engineering, and technology companies innovate, compete, and grow. We are a political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Virginia, an economic development resource really focused on helping manufacturing, technology, and engineering companies grow within the state. We are an affiliate of the NIST MEP National Network and have been since 1994, providing technology and consulting services to those types of businesses to help them become more competitive and ultimately to drive economic development within the Commonwealth and the nation as a whole. We have about 30 direct employees and also employ an extensive network of highly qualified third-party providers, folks who really have particular subject matter expertise like those you're going to hear from today, who are going to help provide information and resources for the companies that we serve. You can see kind of the way we work a little bit. We typically start with some sort of an engagement and assessment process. We will be offering that as we follow up to these webinars with some assessment around the gaps that you may have relative to the regulations that are coming out. And then we provide services in a variety of different areas to help fill those gaps. We work regionally across the state, so we are a statewide resource. We are regionally located. You can kind of see the map behind this, aligned with the regions that you're familiar with, the Go Virginia economic development strategy of being able to look at things regionally. So we really are on the ground. We have a group of what we call regional growth managers located within each one of the regions, and they work with the clients and companies in there and within that ecosystem to really understand what we can do to help them get better. So that's really the best place to contact us, and we'll be following up with you through those regional growth managers after the webinar to help you figure out what you've got to do to get compliant if you're not already. I'm going to turn it over to the experts, the real reason why you're here. So appreciate you all showing up for this GENEDGE webinar. This is going to be part of a 3-webinar series. So we are going to record this. As I said, there will be follow-up after this webinar. You'll get an email with the recording, with the content that's provided, and with a short survey to give us some feedback on how well the webinar went for you so that we can continually update as we go. The first 2 parts of the webinar series will be unique content. So you'll learn some things today from Hunter and Stephen, and then you'll learn some more things in the next series. And then on next Wednesday, the 24th, we have a follow-up session scheduled to do much broader Q&A. So we're going to allow some Q&A at the end of this as you get some content, but don't think that you're going to miss your opportunity to ask questions. You'll always be able to come back to the 24th and ask more in-depth questions as you take the material away and process it and think about it within your staff. So with that said, I want to introduce our practice manager for organizational development, April Schmidt. April's recently joined us from the Missouri affiliate of the NIST MEP network and has really hit the ground running. And she's been instrumental in bringing some of these services to the Virginia companies that we help. So April, I will introduce you and let you speak a little bit about yourself, and then you can introduce our esteemed guests today and the content that we're going to get.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dean, for that great introduction. I am excited to be able to be here, and I would like to take the time to focus on introducing Hunter and Stephen today because I know that everybody's really excited to get to the content portion of today. Byrnes and Gould Law Firm is with us, and Hunter and Stephen are providing their expertise. Together, they have over 30 years of combined diverse legal and multi-jurisdictional experience. Their law firm focuses on general and business corporate law, employment law, litigation, counseling, training, and analysis. And they're going to help us understand Virginia's new the permanent standard related to COVID-19 and workplace safety. Hunter and Stephen, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, April. I'm Hunter Byrnes. Sitting next to me is Stephen Gould. You'll be hearing from Stephen shortly, and we're pleased to be here. We're going to go ahead and start sharing our presentation slides as we go through this important matter before us involving COVID management. And Byrnes Gould, as April just told you, we've been around for a few years. We've practiced together for more years than that, and we're focusing a lot of our time on corporate matters, employment matters, which, as all of you can understand, over the past year has been consumed with all the new laws and reactions to COVID in our lives, whether that's dealing with issues that we'll be handling today, like the temporary, which are now permanent COVID requirements in Virginia, to vaccinations, rapid testing, which we'll be handling in the next webinar on Thursday. But before we get started, like good lawyers, we always have a disclaimer that goes along with this. And Dean, if you're there, we need to allow you to share, allow us to share our screen.
You should be ready to share.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. So we'll go on to the disclaimer, and for those of you that are fans of Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, you'll recognize Saul Goodman down there, who will tell you that these materials and remarks are intended as general discussion of the subject matters addressed. We are not forming an attorney-client privilege with all of you today. They're not intended to be comprehensive or constitute specific legal advice for your entity and should not be relied upon as such. So with that out of the way, today we're going to be going over a quick update on some of the key federal programs that were enacted in first quarter, second quarter of 2020. The FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the PPP, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, and then we'll move on to the bulk of today's program, which is Virginia's permanent COVID-19 workforce safety and health standards. Many of you got to know these as temporary COVID-19 workforce safety and health standards, but there have been some changes and some just permanent enactment of the temporary standards. And then we'll go over some recommendations and takeaways for you as you navigate through these waters. And then we'll give you a quick preview of what we're going to hit on Thursday. And hopefully, if there's a little bit of time left, we'll have some question and answer. And I know that the good folks at GENEDGE have a poll for us to do as we complete today's portion of it. So we'll start on the update with the FFCRA, and you'll hear me use the acronyms for most of these for time, and of course that's just how I think of them in my head. But you'll remember the FFCRA, which took effect last year, early second quarter, and it was designed to end December 31, 2020. And most people that I talked to throughout the fourth quarter fully expected it to just be extended in its current form for another period of time, whatever that happened to be. Well, yes and no. It actually expired on December 31, 2020, but was extended in a voluntary fashion through March 31, 2021, which means that last year employers had to provide the protections of the FFCRA, by allowing people 80 hours for absences. It had the FMLA extension, and all of that ended on December 31, except for you're allowed to continue to offer these protections for your employees. And you will, the good news is you will continue to receive the payroll tax credit for the qualifying wages that you paid those employees for their absences. However, and this is big, it doesn't mean that they get another 80 hours. This extension does not provide additional leave beyond what the original act allowed. So if employee A has already exhausted his or her 80 hours, they don't get a new 80 hours beginning January 1. So they're out. Now you can establish a voluntary policy if you want to pay them more, but you won't be eligible for the tax credit for any extension of that 80 hours. You will be offered the extended period of time for the tax credits if they're using their original allotment. Now, you also need to remember that the need for time off, whether or not it's paid by the employer, may implicate FMLA or ADA, even if the FFCRA does not apply, and that's a lot of acronyms in there for you. But the Families and Medical Leave Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act are the other two acronyms that are up there. And you always, anybody in HR will tell you, you always have to be cognizant of both of those. If you decide you want to continue to offer this leave through March 31, 2021, it cannot be an inconsistent policy that could be discriminatory in any way. What we recommend to our clients is that you pick your policy and you stick with your policy no matter what it is, so that nobody can construe it as being discriminatory. So if employee A comes and says, I'm sick, or I've had contact with somebody with COVID and I need to be out, you don't treat that person differently than somebody who comes to you and says, I think I have symptoms. You can't do that. You're going to have to be consistent with whatever your policy is for all of your employees. So that's a quick update on FFCRA. Next, we look at the Paycheck Protection Program. Many businesses took advantage of the money that was offered through the PPP last year in 2020. Well, there's another round that has been authorized. It was authorized at the end of 2020. And if you're a business that never took advantage of the opportunity last year, you can still take advantage of it for the first time. If you've already taken advantage of it, you can take advantage of it for the second time. But for those second loans, the eligibility has been changed. It's been tightened up. Last year, basically everybody qualified. You didn't have to show a specific decline in gross revenues, because at that point in time when it was first offered, everybody was expecting declines in gross revenues, which is what they were basing it on. So now you actually have need is an element. You have to show an actual need. These second rounds of loans are typically limited to employers with 300 or fewer employees. Before there was no such cap, and before there was no such cap on the loan amounts, which is now at $2 million. We are attorneys. We are not accountants. We can tell you what the law says, but the actual advice on whether or not your company is going to meet the need requirement and everything else, you should be contacting your accountant to deal with those issues and get the best advice you can from him or her, and consider your advantages and disadvantages as to whether or not you want to pursue the second round of funding. There is a lot of money that is still available, so if you are eligible, we recommend that you take advantage of it, because even if you don't qualify for forgiveness, it's still at an extremely low interest rate. So it's about the cheapest way to borrow money that is out there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen, who's going to go ahead and get into the meat of the Virginia COVID-19 management requirements.
Thanks, Hunter, and we'll be spending, as Hunter mentioned earlier, the bulk of the presentation walking through the permanent standards here, and Hunter has referenced the temporary standard that hopefully most of you are familiar with and have been complying with. But just as a quick overview, we're going to walk you through kind of how we got to this point, and if anybody out there is a Talking Heads fan, will recognize David Byrnes here, and we're big fans of pop culture and like to keep things as light as we can, so that explains that slide. Just a brief history for the benefit of everybody. Virginia adopted its temporary standard for COVID workplace safety back in late July of 2020. Virginia made a splash here. We were the first in the nation to adopt something like this. There was a considerable amount of angst in the business community about some of the provisions here. It has now been replaced by a permanent standard as of the end of January. This standard is a little different from most regulations, workplace regulations or regulations generally, in that it has a different kind of expiration date in it. Rather than just being on the books until it's repealed, this permanent standard is going to remain in effect through the duration of the governor's emergency declaration that's related to COVID-19. And once that emergency, state of emergency has been lifted, the Virginia Department of Labor and Industries Board will meet within 14 days to determine whether or not the standard should remain in force going forward. I think we can anticipate that it would be lifted, but the exact timeline for how that will play out, we don't exactly know at this point. To give you a quick overview of what the permanent standard entails, I'll start by saying it's largely the same as the temporary standard. There are some important changes, and we have highlighted a number of those with an asterisk in here. The standard is a lengthy one. It's 58 pages, but it's written in plain language, and our view is that it's written that way to try to help with compliance, to achieve the highest degree of compliance possible. And as you'll hear us talk a little bit later on, complying with this standard is something that certainly an attorney can help you with, but it is designed to be as employer friendly as possible in terms of allowing you to digest and process everything and get your business in compliance without necessarily having to go to the added cost of getting legal advice. The standard represents a mix of requirements for all employers, plus some more specific requirements based on the risk level of the jobs in your enterprise. Certainly, if you interact with other employees or the public, there's an expectation under the standard that employees wear a mask. I want to touch on a few things that the standard does not do, just so that you're aware of these and aren't wondering about them as we go through. There is no contact tracing required of employers under the standard. There's also not going to be any enforcement action against an employer who fails to provide PPE that's required because of market scarcity. Now, obviously, that's going to be something that an employer is going to need to demonstrate that they have tried to obtain PPE, that either because of scarcity or because of pricing they have not been able to acquire everything that they want, but there is recognition in here that there could be scenarios or situations where PPE is scarce enough that employers may be excused from compliance if they have made a good faith effort to acquire it but are not able to do so. Last but not least, before we move to the next slide, if one or more of your employees or all of your employees happen to be vaccinated, that does not relieve you as an employer from your obligation to comply with the provisions of the permanent standard. So this standard is going to be with us for a while. So irrespective of how many or few people within your facility have vaccinations, you need to continue to comply. I'm going to touch first on the requirements for all employers. The standard requires every employer to assess its workplace for exposure risks and then to classify jobs based on one of 4 risk levels: very high, medium, or lower risk. And the standard does a very good job of kind of laying out which category different industries are going to fall in. And as we mentioned later on, most of you and most businesses that are not in the healthcare space are typically going to fall into the medium risk category, and manufacturers are specifically identified as being medium risk in the standard. There's a requirement for all employers to develop policies and procedures for employees to report when they are experiencing signs or symptoms consistent with COVID-19, and also to prevent employees who are known or suspected of being infected from reporting to or remaining at work. These 2 things are things that I would be shocked if all of you are not already doing, whether you were aware of the temporary standard or not. These are kind of the common sense things that employers wanting to take care of their folks and also wanting to make sure that their operations can continue have been doing. And you'll see in the parentheticals on these slides, I've included references to the specific provisions in these standards so that you can follow back up and look at them. That last bullet is something that's it's not a change in the permanent standard, but we wanted to call it out for you. Employers are required to inform subcontractors and vendors about their policy in terms of not coming to work or not staying at work if they are if they're known to be infected or if they're symptomatic. So it's just making it clear that even if somebody is not your employee, if they are coming to your site, if they are working in your direction, you need to make them aware of these expectations, just the same as with your employees. Employers have to establish a system to receive reports of positive tests by their team members. Now, when you are receiving reports like these, there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. One is protecting employee confidentiality. Now, if you have positive cases in your facility, there are going to be certain things that you're going to want to share with others about having positive cases. That does not mean that you say, hey everybody, company-wide email, Bill has COVID. The things that you need to keep confidential normally about employee health conditions, those are the same things you need to continue to keep in mind in the COVID era. The regulations also make it clear that if you are leasing the property that you are operating in, you need to notify the owner of that property if you receive one or more reports of positive tests from your team members. The last item on here is a change from the temporary standard. Previously, you've always had to inform the Virginia Department of Health if you have a positive case at your site, in your workforce. That has been changed now so that the reporting requirement is triggered if you have 2 or more confirmed cases during a 14-day period. So it's a little more relaxed, but the focus there is on trying to identify clusters within a facility. Continuing with the requirements that all employers have, you have to develop policies and procedures for your employees to return to work. Employers are limited to a symptoms-based approach for allowing employees to return to work under this permanent standard. That is a change from the temporary standard. Previously, employers could adopt a symptoms-based approach or a testing-based approach. That testing-based approach is now eliminated under the permanent standard. So with this symptoms-based approach, probably wondering, okay, what are we talking about? In order for employees to come back, they must meet 3 conditions. They have to have been fever-free for at least 24 hours, and that's fever-free without the use of whatever fever-reducing medication they may have been on. Their respiratory symptoms must have improved. And finally, at least 10 days need to have passed since their symptoms first appeared. While you are not allowed to use the testing-based approach for the return to work process, to the extent that you are having employees undergo any testing as part of any return to work determinations that you are not able to require employees to pay for those tests. So in that respect, it's similar to other medical tests under Virginia law that employers are not allowed to pass those costs on to employees. Employers have to adopt policies and procedures to ensure physical and social distancing. Again, this falls into the category of things that you're probably all doing and would continue to do absent any standard being in place. You have to control access to common areas and put in place appropriate sanitation protocols. Now, this is something that is going to be really specific to your facility, determining what your common areas are, how many folks it makes sense to have in those areas on a normal basis, and what makes sense in the COVID era, and also to determine the sanitation protocols. Is cleaning certain areas once a day going to be sufficient, or do you have enough traffic? Do you have multiple shifts that are going to require you to step up those sanitation protocols? The hierarchy of hazard controls is probably one of my favorite phrases in here, just because I don't know, it's just kind of a funny phrase, but it talks about with employee transportation trying to minimize the risks that are associated with that transportation. It starts with eliminating the need for employees to travel together in the same vehicle to the extent that you can. And then with this hierarchy, it kind of goes down from there. It says, okay, let's say you do need more than one employee to travel together. Try to keep the windows down, space people out within the car. So the hierarchy is set forth in the standard. And again, it reflects the state's attempt to acknowledge the practicalities of you needing to keep your business operating, but minimizing the risks that are going to be entailed with that for the folks on your team. Face coverings are going to be, are still required for employees who are within 6 feet of one another. Coverings must cover the nose and mouth and fit appropriately. So everyone that you see who has the chin strap mask or doesn't cover their nose, if the Department of Labor comes calling, the mask needs to cover your nose and your mouth, and it needs to fit appropriately. One clarification or change in the permanent standard for everyone to keep in mind: face shields are not a substitute for face coverings unless there are health restrictions that are going to prevent someone from being able to safely for them wear a mask. A face shield is not going to be a substitute for a face covering. Obviously, you need to continue to comply with the existing sanitation requirements for your industry and develop the cleaning and disinfecting schedules for workspaces, for tools, for common areas, things that are areas that are being shared, tools that are being shared. Not only do you need to keep COVID specific guidelines in mind, you also need to make sure that, as I'm sure you're doing, the things that you were normally doing that you would normally do in the things that you would do in normal times, you're doing those. Those are your baseline, remain your baseline, and then your COVID protections are layered on top of that. Next, I'll touch just briefly on the additional requirements that exist based on the risk level for an employer. So you'll handle the, you'll conduct the assessment of exposure risks, and then you determine what additional requirements are going to apply. And as I mentioned earlier, most non-healthcare employers are going to fall into the medium risk level, and manufacturers again are specifically or explicitly mentioned as employers that are most likely going to be in that medium risk category. Those who are in the medium risk level have a number of specific risk minimization requirements that they're expected to adhere to. And there are three separate categories. The first is engineering controls. Here, you're really talking about, in particular, your air handling systems. And first and foremost, the Department of Labor and Industry is saying, make sure that your air handling systems are maintained, that your maintenance schedule is in effect, that you are really doing the things that in your normal course of business you would do, but have taken on added importance in the COVID era to make sure that air is circulating properly and that you are not unnecessarily increasing the risk for what folks are breathing in your facility. To the extent that you can install physical barriers where helpful, the permanent standard wants you to do that. And I know this isn't this is an example that is not a manufacturing specific one, but there is a pizza place next door to our office, and at a time they had installed a piece of plastic between the cashier and you. So, you know, installing those cost-effective physical barriers where you can, just to limit what is passing back and forth between individuals, you want to do that. And to the extent that those types of things make sense in your operations, you want to examine those. Next are the administrative and work practice controls. And I like to think of these as what you can do operationally to minimize risk. All of these things in the standard are qualified as being based on feasibility. So certainly you need to look at what your operation allows for, and some of these things would be applicable to some, but not to others. And a couple of the examples that the standard sets out are pre-shift screening. So establishing a certain screening process for folks to identify whether they are symptomatic or possibly been exposed, examining teleworking for those who are able to, looking at flexible hours to reduce the number of folks who are in the facility at one time. Obviously, physical distancing, wanting to maximize that to the extent possible. Again, all of these are going to be based on feasibility. And you know, to the credit of the Department of Labor and Industry, they recognize that this is, there are many things here that are a kind of one-size-fits-all approach in terms of these requirements for all employers, but they also recognize that businesses need to be able to continue their operations, and particularly for those things like manufacturing that are going to be heavily reliant on folks being there in person. Not all of these things are going to work. So what you can do, you should do, but again, not everything is going to be expected of all employers. Last but not least, if your assessment determines that the particular work risks in your facility make having PPE advisable, you need to provide that to your employees. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn things over to Hunter to run through a couple of the biggies under the additional biggies under the permanent standard that have some deadlines coming up in March that employers will want to be aware of.
The first and probably the biggest, and the one that might require the most amount of time by you as an employer, is the Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response Plan. And specifically, it's 220-70, and specifically, you've got to create this plan. Now, it's based upon employers that have the very high or the high designation, or employers that are medium and have 11 or more total employees, which again is going to be most of the folks that are on this call, if not all. So you probably fall into the category of if we don't have one yet, we've got to create this Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response Plan. Generally, I can tell you that most of the employers we've dealt with on this have named somebody in their HR department, if it's not their HR manager, as the point person for implementing the provisions of this plan. You are required to designate a point person inside your company. So you can't pick, company alpha to come in and be your point person. You've got to pick somebody that actually works there. So if you don't have an HR department, maybe it's your plant manager, maybe it's your supervisor, whatever it happens to be, you need to pick that person to implement the provisions of the plan. As Stephen told you earlier, these regulations are actually laid out for the layman to read and understand. And they tell you basically what you need to consider in your infectious disease preparedness and response plan. You don't have to start from scratch and just try to guess what needs to be in there. You can also go online and search, and you will be able to find links to other plans that have already been implemented that you can steal and adapt to your own needs and your circumstances. The specific requirements are in the plan. You can follow the DOLE template, which it says that the link is to follow. It's actually, I think, on the next page of this. And I saw one of the questions earlier was, will we get a copy of this PowerPoint? And the answer is yes, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint. So you don't have to memorize or frantically write down this DOLE link, which is going to be on the next page, or the other links. We've given these to you so that hopefully you can answer some of your own questions, find the templates that you need, and move forward. But you need to get working on this, because again, this is, from all the reports that I've gotten, this is the most difficult for people to find time to actually sit down and do it, because you have to think. What applies to me, what doesn't apply to me, what risk are we in? And so go ahead and get cracking on it. You've got a little over a month left to get this plan in place. The next is, and again, most of y'all have already done this. We highlight this because it's very, very important that it's done, but from the perspective of what you are dealing with on a daily basis, you're probably already hitting the training requirements, whereas you might not have hit the emergency infectious disease preparedness plan. But for the training requirements, this applies to all employers. It doesn't matter how big, how small you are, unless you are in a lower risk designation, you have to follow the training requirements. And the standard, it tells you exactly what needs to be in your training. What most companies have done is they've pulled out that standard and they just used it as a checklist. And so you'll notice that you have to have the very next bullet point on this page is employers must have a written certification record of the training. And what most employers have done is they cut and paste that checklist into the written certification and have their employees sign and their point person or their HR person sign as well, noting the date that the employee received the training, and specifically checking every single one of those boxes that has been done. The next bullet point is a little tricky. It says, if the employee's actions demonstrate that he or she failed to grasp all or part of the training, the employer has the affirmative obligation to retrain him or her. So what does it mean that they demonstrated a failure to grasp all or part of the training? That is completely subjective on you. It could be objective in terms you could have a box for them to check that says, I understand all of the requirements and I grasp all of the training that I've received. However, that doesn't mean that they actually grasped it. But when they're getting trained, you need to give an opportunity for them to ask questions. You might even want to pose a couple of questions to them to make sure that they understand the basic requirements under your COVID training program. Again, like the preparedness plan, all of this training must have occurred no later than March 26th. So you've got a little over a month. And it's an ongoing thing. So if you hire somebody on March 26th, 27th, they have to then receive all the training that you've done up until that point so that you can check them off, have a written verification that all new employees are getting that training as well, so long as these permanent COVID-19 management requirements are placed. Like Stephen said, we don't know how long that's going to last. So just continue to do this training so that you will be up to date and all your employees will be as well. We're next going to move on to some of the resources and the enforcement and directs. And Stephen, you want me to handle it? Okay. I'll go on through it. I was about to skip the discrimination slide, which you should never skip the discrimination slide. We mentioned earlier that your policies should be free of any discrimination. And I mentioned that when we were talking about the FFCRA. Well, same goes for your COVID-19 management requirements. Similar to other state and federal worker protections, the standard prohibits discrimination or retaliation against those who report concerns regarding your safety practices. So if employee A says, reports to your boss or reports to DOLE or whoever, Department of Health, that you are not doing all that you should be doing, that you're not requiring PPP, or that you're not testing, or you're letting people come back to work, or whatever they think is a violation of the safety practices, you can't fire them. You can't treat them differently because they brought this up. Unfortunately, the subheading or the sub bullet here says, including concerns aired publicly. So if they go out and they post something on social media, if they go out and in a meeting with all of your staff say something that you view as embarrassing, it really doesn't matter if it involves the safety practices. It's protected speech, so you cannot discriminate or retaliate against them. You also cannot discharge or discriminate against an employee who wears their own PPE, as long as it is not creating a hazard. Now, if they come in with this big, huge helmet mask that gets in the way of a machine that could possibly involve decapitation or injury to the employee or another employee, then you should address that and find PPE that works. You can't discriminate or discharge them if they wear their own face mask. If you're not providing one, they can wear their own, so long as it doesn't create a hazard. Basically, those are common sense. You know, if somebody feels more comfortable with their own mask and it's not a hazard, let them wear it. If it's providing the same protection and safety, you're probably not causing an issue about that anyway, but don't treat them differently. Any existing regulations regarding an employee's ability to refuse to work because of a reasonable fear of illness or death remain in effect. So you can't force somebody into doing something if they have a reasonable, and that's a big word, reasonable fear of illness or death. Now, if everybody's being treated equally and nobody else has that fear, it's probably not a reasonable fear. But if you're basing it out of 2 people and 1 out of the 2, you can't really discount that as unreasonable. I mentioned that if you've got, 15 people and 1 out of 15 says, I think I might die because of that, and the other 14 say there is no reasonable fear, then you need to counsel them. And again, this is common sense too, but try to work with your employees. Try to be cognizant of the fact that at a period of time when the country's foremost leaders in COVID have changed their opinions on important matters, people might have a degree of uncertainty. And so, try to meet with them and counsel them, but ultimately, if it's unreasonable, then again, you can discipline them how you need to.
Want to chat just a little bit as we finish up about some of the resources that are available to you and some other information about enforcement that we've been made aware of. First, DOLE has templates and other materials that are helpful to you online for free. We've got the URL there, and again, these materials will be provided to you. These are provided in multiple languages, and if nothing else, they should be helpful starting points so that while you're developing your own policies and procedures, you are going to want to recommend tweaking things as appropriate for your operations, for your industry. Again, it's not possible for DOLE to put out something that's customized for every situation, but they do have some very helpful templates that exist. We also, again, suggest that you reach out to any trade associations that you're a member of for sample policies or plans or other guidance documents. And there may be helpful industry-specific supplements that they can provide. So things like in manufacturing groups, certainly GENEDGE will continue to be a great resource for you. Perhaps not just with pointing you toward resources, but helping to connect with other businesses that perhaps have already tackled some of these issues and can serve as a sounding board for you. Wanted to tell you a little bit of what we know about enforcement up to this point, because we've got about 7 months of enforcement by the state that's already occurred. In the governor's press release last month announcing the permanent standard, you could kind of reading in between the lines see that compliance is what is most important here. There will be enforcement, but there are practical limitations on how much enforcement can occur given the given staffing constraints with DOLE. So from the start, this has really been about trying to establish that that baseline, that floor, and get as much compliance with that as possible. Now, there have been a significant number of complaints that have been received by DOLE as of last month. Only a small number of those have necessitated a full investigation based on the level of the concern being very serious, and then an even smaller number of those were cited. Now, that does not mean that you should not take these seriously. Again, what we're trying to convey here is that DOLE wants to work with businesses to make sure that they're doing things the right way. And it looks like only if you are kind of scoffing at what it is that you need to do to keep your people safe that you're going to have some bigger concerns. Couple of recommendations or takeaways for you before we finish up. Number one, familiarize yourself with the permanent standard and make a good faith effort to comply. Giving something the old college try here is not sufficient. If you are just paying lip service to this, if you are saying, yeah, I got it, and your employees or others report you, that's what's going to put you in the crosshairs with Dole. They understand that everybody is doing the best they can, but you've got to be making a good faith effort here. Set the tone at the top, whether it's from your management, from HR, that compliance is going to be expected and it's going to be monitored. And if you fall short of complying, then there are going to be consequences. COVID is not something to be taken lightly, particularly given the ability to disrupt operations and to negatively affect your most important resource, which is your people in most cases. Again, take advantage of the resources that are available to you through Dole, through GENEDGE, through any trade associations. You're all running your businesses. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here, and we would never recommend that you do that. Reiterating something that Hunter mentioned earlier, remember that COVID-19 employment considerations are not occurring in a vacuum. Yes, there are COVID-19 specific things that you need to consider, but that does not take the place of also thinking, how is the ADA, the FMLA, Title VII, how are those things implicated by the decisions that we're making here? And again, if you're in doubt, we always recommend seeking legal advice. Now, a couple of items or a couple of ways that that your legal counsel can help you. It's again, assessing whether requested leave qualifies under the Families First Act, and that's something you may have been doing since last spring. Counsel can help to guide employers through appropriate responses when you do have employees test positive. I'm guessing most of you have probably had one or more employees who have tested positive or have had scares, and you've had to react accordingly. Some of them may not have had that. So figuring out how do we want to respond, and also what do we need to also be thinking about, not just, okay, what are our responsibilities under this permanent standard and under Families First, but what are the other existing employment laws that we need to take into account? And finally, counsel can help you with reviewing the policies and plans and compliance documents that you generate as a result of this permanent standard. Again, to all credit to Dole for creating a standard that that the layperson, the non-attorney, can understand, can digest. But with that, if you have concerns about whether or not you are, what you've done checks all the boxes, certainly legal counsel can help to give you some additional comfort there. Now Hunter's going to give you a quick overview of what to expect with the webinar on Thursday.
I'll go ahead and apologize right now for the time today. We told you this is the thickest, and it is. So next time will not be quite as thick, but we are going to hit a very important topic first on Thursday, which is about rapid testing in the workplace, and how that's available to you and what the implications are and the efficacy of that. And then we move on to the most asked question these days for us anyway, involving vaccinations and policies involving vaccinations. And can we make it mandatory? What if we make it optional? What if employees don't want to do it? So on and so forth. How does this implicate discrimination laws? So we're going to hit all that and have Q&A time at the end of the next session on Thursday. With the few minutes that we have left, I will turn it over to April and see if we can hit any questions and answers today. Stephen and I thank everybody for your attention. We hope that we've addressed most of it so that you can at least follow the links if we run out of time today. But remember, send in those questions. If we don't get to them today, we'll try to get to them on Thursday or next Wednesday on the follow-up webinar. April, all yours.
So I did see two questions come in. One of them is that some companies have been leaving it optional for employees in the facility to wear a mask. Does this new permanent standard now make that a requirement?
Well, the answer is yes and no. It depends on where these employees are. Hey, that's a good lawyer right there. It depends. It depends where these employees are working. Remember, if they're within 6 feet of other people, the answer is you have to wear a mask. There's no getting around it. But if you've got, a person inside of an office by themselves, no, they don't have to wear a mask. They're not within 6 feet of anybody else. That is in terms of what is required. Now, should you have a policy that leaves it into the discretion of your employees as to whether or not they're within 6 feet and whether or not it can be monitored? That depends on your situation. It depends on how many employees you've got, the intelligence of your employees, the willingness of your supervisors to actually monitor it. It's going to depend on each employer's particular circumstance. Stephen, would you agree?
I would.
Okay.
And I know I saw some other questions come through in the chat. Please know I will take those questions down and we will look to make sure that those are addressed. I know we have a short poll that we would like to get feedback on. So as you type in your questions, if you have them, if we could ask that you take 30 seconds or so to answer these questions for us. As Dean mentioned, we are part of a larger organization and we also like to be able to gather data and feedback to see if we're reaching new individuals, but also wanting to make sure that content was helpful for you today and understand challenges or gaps that maybe we can help you with in terms of additional webinars and speakers. So again, if you could take just a couple of seconds to answer this poll, that would be great. Again, this is being recorded. We are looking to send you the recording, the PowerPoint slides, as well as a survey link later this afternoon. If you have additional questions that we did not get to today, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can, and I will put my email address in the chat too, and you can email them to me directly. If you have not already registered for Thursday's session, I see we've got the link up there so that you can do that or know how to access it. You can also gain that information from our website. Dean, any additional closing comments that you would like to provide today?
I think you've covered it very well. I think the questions are, we should expect to have the recording of this up this afternoon, so you can share that with other folks who may not have had the chance to see the webinar today. As well as look for other communications, both email and social media on the follow-on sessions, especially the one that April announced. I know she mentioned it in the chat room, but we are looking at setting up a session for help with the training requirements that Hunter and Stephen were talking about earlier. So there'll be more to come as we continue to roll what resources we have out. And we will have a resource page that I will provide the link with in the email follow-up today that should have other resources as we add them. So place for you to keep checking back and look for some of those easy cheats and not recreating the wheel that Hunter was talking about earlier. So I appreciate the time. I think we're at the limit of our time. So thank you, Hunter and Stephen. Thank you, April, for a great presentation. I think it was very informative. I was a little thick, and that's good information. So we will continue to follow up on the 24th as well. So don't hesitate to sign up for all of those sessions, and we'll look forward to seeing you as we learn more over the next week. So thank you very much. Have a great day.